everyone, Alexa Donne here, and today I am going to be doing my December reading wrap-up. I only read 5 books this month, but they're all basically domestic thrillers, kind of, and I enjoyed every single one of them. So a bit less of a packed reading month, but a very good one. Most of these are coming out in spring 2020, so this is a good one if you're wondering what big thrillers you should be picking up in early 2020 to get your thriller read on. That said, the first book I read is a YA book that came out in the summer but has been on my TBR basically all year, and I finally read it, and I said I read domestic thrillers this month. This one technically isn't a thriller, which we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about my impressions versus what the book was and how I rated the book based on what it was, not on what my expectations were. And so this one is definitely domestic, but it's not a thriller. It's a high-stakes contemporary YA. This is how I would describe it. I've got you in suspense. It is Past Perfect Life by Elizabeth Eulberg. So this is a YA novel where the setup is that this girl, she's a senior in Wisconsin, she has a single dad, and she's applying to college, and everything changes when she submits her college applications and find out she is not who she thinks she is. Her dad has been lying to her, she has a different name, and essentially she was kidnapped when she was 3 years old. So that is the setup as it is on the back cover copy, so that is what I knew about the book before I read it. And it was on my TBR because, you know, I love some interesting college admissions, and I thought that that was a really interesting setup. Now, my expectation kind of based on the cover of the book, and it's one of these things where I'm like, I swear, the early marketing material pushed this as a suspense novel. I must have gotten it from the mystery and thriller section on NetGalley, but then again, who knows? It could have just been the teen section. The point is, I got this as an ARC from NetGalley, but note to publishers, those protected PDFs that you can only read in like this one special Adobe Reader app, it's not compatible for any other reader app. We don't like those. I basically couldn't read it because you couldn't even it wasn't, the text didn't adjust for the screen, and I could only get that app on my phone, and I had serious eye strain. I read like 2 chapters I tried to read on this app, and I couldn't. Long story short, I got the book through Book of the Month YA, which I thought was fortuitous, so I read a physical copy of the book, and it's been out since the summer. I really, really liked it for what it was, which is, as I said, high-stakes contemporary. So I thought it was going to be all suspensey about being kidnapped and like kind of drawing out the thread of what happened to her as a kid. But that is literally just the setup. You know, in that first part of the book, the first 20%, first couple of chapters, exactly what happened to her. And then the thrust of the novel, it's all personal emotional stakes, because she finds out that her dad kidnapped her from her mom and her entire life is upended, and it's about all of the fallout from there. That her mom lives thousands of miles away and is a stranger to her, but loves her and misses her, and her dad is now a criminal, and she has to leave everything that she's ever known. So that is the thrust of the plot of the novel. It's the media storm when this comes out. It's the conflict with the mom that she doesn't even remember, who basically is like, you're my daughter. It's all of that. And it is A+ emotional stakes. I was so upset reading this book. Upset in the sense that I was 100% on this journey with this main character. And generally, I don't read this kind of contemporary a lot, YA contemporary, but I did when I was a teenager. My favorite genre when I was an actual teen was this kind of YA contemporary. It's why this kind of YA contemporary does very well in YA. I think there's a certain level of like teen angst and soap that you really want when you're a teen. I'm thinking of like those books. I don't even remember what they were called, but I know there was one when I was a teenager. I think we read it for school, in fact, about like a pregnant teen. It's that kind of like drama in YA contemporary, high stakes emotional drama. High concept, high stakes emotional drama in YA. And so if that's the kind of thing you like, I highly recommend this because I was with the main character. I was so upset when things happened to her. I was like yelling at the book. Like I wanted to yell through the book at the people who were being absolutely horrible to her because she gets thrown into this horrible situation that's out of her control. Her entire life is upended and everyone expects her to behave in a certain way and do certain things and be happy about certain things. So I was really with her for that. That said, so I did give this book 5 stars because I feel that all of this that I just said, it delivers that reading experience. So if you like those kind of books, I thought it was a real home run. I do have 2 little quibbles about the book. The structure / pacing is interesting, and there's a thing that happens. It's late enough in the book that I do feel it's a spoiler, and the weird thing to me is that I actually think it should have been the setup, not the twist. It's a twist kind of near the middle, a little bit past the middle, a thing that happens that changes the status quo of the story. And it's actually that status quo change, that's when I flew through the book really, really fast. That's when I really latched on to those emotional high stakes. But I don't want to tell you because it basically constitutes the last third of the book. As I said, this is something that's slightly past the midpoint, thus it acts more like a twist, even though I don't think it's a twist. But I wanted more of that thing. So that thing that comprises the last third of this book, a little more than the last third, was my favorite part of the book. High conflict, high stakes, emotions, and I wanted more. I got to, because I was reading the physical book, I got to a point where things were happening, and I was like, whoa. And I'm like, there's like 10, 15 pages of this book left. There's something's like, what? There's gotta be more, because this is about to, shit's about to hit the fan, and there's gonna be so much fallout. And then it resolves very, very quickly. So my quibble is I wanted more of that, and kind of less of the buildup, or just a longer book. I would have been fine with a longer book. But it's just the way that it was plotted and structured and the way that the beats fell. It just so happens the things that I liked the best were third act beats, whereas I would have loved if they were second and third act, if it had been stretched out and I had more of that thing that I really, really liked. And the second thing, just because it's me, part of the setup with the college admissions is factually inaccurate. It did not ruin my enjoyment of this book, but it did make me laugh a little bit in the setup. And I just feel it's my responsibility to say it because this is who I am. So the crux of the twist, again, it's in the back cover copy. You know that she finds out when applying for college that she was kidnapped as a kid. But here's how she finds out, where I was like, it would have taken such minor changes to make it factually accurate, but I digress. I mean, fiction does get to take license, but just so you know. So in the book, she applies to state schools in Wisconsin because those are her dream schools. She has to submit her social security number. Factual inaccuracy, number 1. You do not have to submit your social security number when you apply for college. Essentially, citizenship is not a requirement for college admissions at schools in the United States. It's definitely not a requirement for admission, for applying. So you wouldn't have to submit your social security number to college. And then the second thing that happens in the book to trigger the whole plot is because she submitted her social security number to these 3 state schools, they do an automatic check, and she gets basically like an automatic response from her 3 applications that say, there's an error with your social security number and we couldn't accept your application. So she goes to her college counselor, to the guidance counselor at her high school, and says, there was an error with my social security number. Oh, I did have 2. And this triggers the counselor, the guidance counselor, to know something is fishy, and that is the snowball that leads to her dad essentially being caught for fabricating a social security number for her because he kidnapped her. Essentially, the original social security number was her real one, and the second one that he gave her so that she could apply to college was a fake social security number. So that's how it all unravels, but you don't submit your social security number to college, and there's definitely not any kind of checking system and an automated response that would say, we ran your social security number through a database and it is incorrect and we have a problem. That literally wouldn't happen. There are other things you might need to submit your social security number for, like financial documents, so they could have done it with a finance document, but doing it with the application was definitely inaccurate. And generally what just kind of made me So the dad, of course, wants to hide that he kidnapped her when she was younger because he loves her very much and wants to keep her and not go to jail. And yet he allowed his daughter to manage her own college applications, to apply in the first place. I found that really, really interesting because applying for FAFSA, federal financial aid, would have blown their cover anyway. So I'm low-key shocked that he was stupid enough to let her apply for FAFSA. It would have been far more realistic for the conflict to be, you don't need to go to college, because he was hiding the fact that applying to college would blow their cover. It just wouldn't blow their cover in the way that it's depicted. Anyway, I still really enjoyed the book. Technically it's such a minor thing, even though it's also the entire way that the plot gets kicked off. So that's just an amusing little note from me. Luckily it didn't matter because it didn't come up again. The point is that it's how the top is blown off of this secret, and then the whole book is all of this incredible, emotional, high-stakes fallout, and I really enjoyed it. Next, I read The Girls' Weekend by Jodi Gehrman. I think this one comes out in March, and I liked this one so much it almost made my favorite reads of 2019 video. I ended up giving it an honorable mention because I literally finished it like 2 days before I filmed my favorites list for that video, and I decided ultimately other ones just beat it out. But the point is, hey, I really like this book. Why did I really like this book? So I love the setup. It is about a girls' weekend. So it's a group of women who were really close friends in college, maybe a little bit of toxic girl friendship, which is a trope that I really enjoy. I like when groups of people with very intense personalities have an intense history and then have to come back together for a reunion. It's a trope I enjoy, especially in thrillers, because you can make it messy. This one's really messy. The main character, June, was the aspiring writer in the group. Yeah. This one's great for writers. Like, it's gonna get you right in the feels because she was the aspiring writer who wanted to be published, and it just didn't quite happen for her. She published one novel with a small press that is now out of print. She also had a romance with a TA. She and Sadie, the queen bee of the college friend group, were in love with Ethan, and they were fighting for his affections, and he ended up marrying Sadie. And then Sadie wrote a best-selling children's book series that was made into a blockbuster movie franchise. So Sadie is the rich, beautiful, super successful one who technically has everything June ever wanted. Inherent conflict, which is why she hasn't seen her in a really long time, because Sadie brings out the worst in June. She makes her feel bitter and jealous and petty. She is really close to M, who lives closer to her. And then there is Amy, who is Sadie's cousin, who's always lived with her because she was like the more poor relation and Sadie was the rich one. And then there is Kimiko, who is their kind of wild and crazy friend who's very boho, who now runs a weed dispensary. And they're all getting together for the weekend. June hasn't seen most of them since Kimiko's wedding, which was I think like 10 or 12 years before. And they were super besties 20 years ago, basically, but they've grown apart. But Amy is pregnant. Amy is having a baby. So Sadie recommends a big girls' weekend, which would basically be a baby shower for Amy, a big reunion for everyone. June does not want to go, and she actually declines at first because she has a boyfriend, and she's like, I'm going to plan a camping trip with my boyfriend as an excuse not to go on this girls' weekend because I don't want to spend a weekend at Sadie's mansion in Puget Sound. But then her boyfriend breaks up with her over text, and she can't get out of the girls' weekend anymore, so she goes, and it's all the delicious conflict that you expect from this setup. Every single one of the women has beef with Sadie. Sadie is an alpha kind of mega bitch. You kind of hate her too, and her beautiful perfect mansion. Really good atmosphere in this one. I could see all of it. I felt like I was there. The setting was really, really good. It's a case where this estate that they end up on is part of the setting, and it is a very isolated estate, so it is the isolation trope, which is one of my favorites. Girls' weekend, big estate, isolation, Sadie disappears. And so the main thrust of the mystery is everyone got blackout drunk, suspiciously blackout drunk, and when they woke up, there was blood on the wall and Sadie was gone. And it's this tension build up of none of us can remember anything. Everyone's having little flashes of memory. June has flashes of a scream and kissing someone, which reminds me of another delicious piece of tension I almost forgot about before the blackout drunkenness and Sadie disappearing, June lets us all know that before Sadie married Ethan, Ethan and June actually dated, and Ethan asked June to marry him, and June said no. Sadie doesn't know this. She doesn't know that she got sloppy seconds, so in a weird way, June actually kind of did win, but really she didn't, because now Sadie is an internationally best-selling multi-millionaire with a mansion and a hot Scottish husband and a perfect family. But on the first night that they are there, Ethan texts June and says, I want to see you, and they meet, and he tells her that it's over with Sadie, the marriage is horrible, he's gonna leave her and he still has feelings for her. And June, to her credit's like, I don't want to get involved in your mess. But part of the conflict setup is someone definitely saw her going down to the beach house, because this is an estate that has a separate beach house and a separate guest house on it and the main mansion, but someone saw her going to meet with Ethan, and it contributes to motive for June. And again, June can't remember anything about the night Sadie disappeared except for a scream and kissing someone, and she's worried that she slept with Ethan and that maybe Sadie found them. June herself questions whether she did something to Sadie, but she also questions everyone else. And this is one of my favorite parts about the building suspense and tension of this one. This is all just setup, by the way. I'm giving you all the delicious setup, and that's the thing. The interpersonal conflicts were fantastic. I questioned everyone and everything. Everyone had a reason to hate Sadie. Everyone had a reason to do something to Sadie. But Sadie also had very good reasons to potentially disappear, to mess with the people because they'd all betrayed her in some way. According to her, Sadie's definitely a very messy character and personality. And I questioned everything. I questioned June. I questioned all the other women. They each had a motive to do something to Sadie. I questioned Sadie. I questioned Ethan. There's a hot guy with a yurt who lives on the property, and he also has sparks fly with June, and I questioned him. I was like, is he a secret love child? Is he a secret affair partner? I don't know. I questioned everything. So it was a good suspense read because I was really engaged. I was questioning things. I was relating to characters. There were moments where I really didn't like June as a main character and moments where I found her frustratingly relatable. And it did have a lot of good twists. So I know you're like, this sounds like a 5-star read. Why did you give it 4 stars? So as with most of these books, it all comes down to the ending. I am gonna try to discuss this without spoilers. I think it's more fun. So ultimately it was 4 stars for me because there were just a few things with the ending that, I don't know, it's almost inexplicable. Sometimes I can really pinpoint exactly what it was about a book that fell flat for me. With this one, it was weird. It's like I got into the last third, so you're getting into the climax point when the twists are twisting and you're finally getting a sense of what actually happened, and then you know everything. Where I don't know, it was less delicious all of a sudden. But not in like a, oh, I really don't like this, but just in a, it's 4 instead of 5 stars way. There were just a few tiny little things that were almost red herrings that got dropped, and a few characters who were definitely given a bit of short shrift in the sense that they didn't really get a resolution at the end. So just, About the actual twist, all I'll say is, at a certain point, I did definitely call it. Early enough that I feel pretty decent about myself. Bits of it were still surprising, and it was definitely satisfying. I don't know, it just was 4 stars instead of 5. What can I say? That said, if you like all of these tropes and all of this setup, you will probably also like this book. It was a really good reading experience. It just wasn't like a hit it out of the park all-time fave for me. Speaking of tropes that I love, next I read Have You Seen Me by Kate White, also coming out this spring, and this one is a pitch-perfect domestic suspense, unreliable narrator-ish because it's the amnesia trope. It's also ridiculously rich people in New York trope, which is definitely, I think, like a subcategory in thriller, adult thriller land. The ridiculously rich New York couple, like, rich Manhattanite problems, but I enjoy them. So this is one where the main character shows up to work one morning, she's soaking wet, and she's forgotten her key card, and in turn lets her in, and then she realizes that she has also forgotten her office key. She doesn't know what's wrong with her. Well, she goes into the conference room to wait for her secretary to arrive to let her into her office. Instead, the owner of the company and her ex comes, and he seems very surprised to see her. And she soon discovers and is told, you haven't worked here in 5 years. what are you doing here? So it turns out she's had amnesia. She's been in a fugue state. She has showed up to work and she doesn't remember who she is. She goes off to the hospital and happily, thankfully, everything comes back to her except for the last 72 hours of her life. So she finally remembers, oh yes, that's right. I did leave Greenbacks and I married a lovely man named Hugh. And I now do a podcast and I write financial advice books. Like, how could I forget all this? But I only remember up until Monday night. Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday morning when she walked into her old job are a complete blank. And so it becomes her quest to find out what the hell happened to her in those 48 to 72 hours, why she lost her memory, and what happened to her. And it ended up being a lot twistier than I anticipated. There were some really good things I wasn't anticipating. Like, it seems silly, but one of the things she does is she hires a private investigator, which I wouldn't have thought of. You know, you always expected to be the sole MC investigator trope, but I really liked the conflict it added, getting a private investigator to dig deeper. And there were some serious stakes upping in that plot thread. Also, some really good, another trope I really love, and really good conflict driver of, you know, that something very traumatic happened to the main character when she was 9 years old. And when her therapist suggests that there might have been some kind of trauma that would have led to this fugue state, she thinks, what if it was something connected to finding the body of a child when she was 9 years old? So you get the layers of the second suspense trope of secrets in the past and what went down when the main character was a kid and whether indeed that might have triggered her fugue state. I don't want to say anything else without revealing spoilers, except to say I found this a very compelling read. I was coming back to it over and over again. I was very emotionally involved in everything that was happening. I was guessing things and figuring some stuff out and not other things. I loved it right until the very end. You're like, oh, what a pattern. But it's really just the difference between a 5 and a 4 stars for me on most of these books. And that is the big climax was a little bit rushed, and thus I felt slightly deprived of the big confrontation with the bad guy, and it was just kind of a letdown, and it kind of just took the wind out of my sails for the last part of the book. I just wish it had been a little bit stretched out. That said, it did a really good job at one of my favorite things in a good thriller, which is the kind of resolution after the big climax. I did like all of the threads coming together and a lot of the kind of emotional release that you get at the end of the book. That was really well done. There were also multiple layered twists that I really appreciated. So overall, a really good reading experience. So if you like ridiculous rich New Yorkers with first world Manhattan problems and amnesia trope and dark secrets in the past trope, as well as very messy interpersonal relations. Another one that had very messy relationships. I mean, conflict is the driver of really good fiction. There were multiple people in the main character's life who I just didn't trust. I did not trust them. And then you found out things about them and I was mad at them. So very good emotional reading experience. Just kind of didn't nail the ending for me, but still a very good book. Next, I read The Other Misses by Mary Kubica, also coming out this spring, and this is the trickiest of the bunch. Well, actually, the next one, the last one I read, is also a little tricky. This is one where I'm not sure if what I read was immaculately constructed, and I was in the deft, sure hands of an amazing writer who delivered exactly what she was meaning to deliver, or if I missed something, or if there wasn't foreshadowing for a thing. But I actually lean towards the former. I've had 3 or 4 days to let this book sit, and ultimately I think it's incredibly well crafted. That's so vague, right? I'm gonna have to talk about this book both with spoilers and without. I'm going to start without spoilers, and when I do talk about spoilers, it's not so much to blow the whole ending, but there is almost a trigger warning I have to give, but the trigger warning is spoilery. I will say non-spoilery first, that the reason I do want to give a spoilery trigger warning is there's an aspect of one of the twists of the book that I know is a deal breaker for a lot of readers. It's not a deal breaker for me, which is why I lean on the side of, yeah, I really liked this book. I gave it 4 stars, not a perfect 5-star read, but a really good read. But I can see this book being incredibly polarizing. I can see readers who hate this other thing that I will eventually talk about, just either DNFing when they figure it out, not picking it up at all because they know that they're gonna get mad, or just outright hating it because of this thing that it does. I should probably start by telling you what the book is. I can only tell you about a fraction of the setup because if I tell you too much, I do think it's going to ruin the book. So I'm only going to tell you about the literal setup of the book, which is you have 2 POVs. One is Sadie. Sadie and her husband Will have just moved with their 2 sons to Maine because Will's sister Alice committed suicide, leaving behind her 16-year-old daughter Imogen and her house in Maine. So he's inherited the house and guardianship of Imogen. So they uproot their entire lives from Chicago and move to Maine. I really like the setting in this one. It had a very, well, Stephen King feel because they're in a remote part of Maine. They're living on an island. They have to take a ferry back and forth to the island. I love the kind of conflict that adds because it's like a small town where everyone knows everyone. And Sadie and her family are outsiders, and so not everyone is welcoming of Sadie. Sadie's a doctor, so she works in the town's medical clinic, but like the secretary, for example, really hates her. She has some neighbors who aren't too keen on her because she's an outsider. Will is a professor and stay-at-home dad, and you do know kind of early on that it was serendipitous that this horrible thing happened to Will's sister and they moved to Maine, and Imogen, I should mention, hates them. She's like super goth and like curses at them and tells them to leave her house and that she hates them, and Sadie's always like snooping in Imogen's room trying to find out what she's up to, and Imogen gets mad, so you have the conflict of like emo and understandably grieving teenage girl who like really doesn't want them there in the old creepy house. And then you do know that her son Otto, he's I think 14, was expelled from his last school in Chicago. You also know that Sadie had to leave her job and that Will cheated on her. So you do get these little bits of their lives having imploded in Chicago, and then they've made this big move to Maine to start over. Then about 8 weeks after the move, one of their neighbors is horrifically murdered, and the police are asking all of their neighbors questions, and specifically one of their neighbors, who doesn't really like Sadie, has told the cops that they saw Sadie having an argument with the neighbor who was murdered. And this throws Sadie into the investigation because she's like, that's a lie. Why are they doing this to me? I have to clear my name, so I have to find out who killed Morgan. Then the other POV is with Camille, and Camille is the woman who had an affair with Will, Sadie's husband, and she basically used to be Sadie's roommate, is really jealous that Sadie stole Will from her, and so then she came back later, seduced Will, and has followed her to Maine. So you go back and forth between Sadie's POV and Camille's POV, and it's kind of this building of the murder of the neighbor and Sadie kind of driving herself to extremes to solve it. And then all of the interpersonal conflicts with Imogen not wanting her there and there being questions about Imogen and her mother's death. So it's that kind of domestic suspense. So it builds to a pretty bonkers and twisty conclusion. Sadie becomes the kind of character who really almost starts losing her mind in the course of this investigation. She was doing things that I couldn't believe she was doing. It was like that secondhand embarrassment you get in a thriller when the main character pushes it too far, but of course you need her to push it too far because you need things to move forward. And then all I can say further is the book has multiple and layered twists in the third act. And that's where ultimately I think it did a brilliant job. I think it was a brilliant sleight of hand of kind of the twists and where things were going. Like I said, at first I was kind of conflicted because one of them just hit me out of nowhere and I was like, did I miss it? And I might have missed it. I'll be perfectly honest with you. I bet if I went back and read it, it's there. But I think that what the author did, she did a very brilliant redirect, which I can't talk about because it is spoilers, so I'll talk about it in the spoilers section. I think it was all intentional, and I think it was brilliantly done. So if you like the stuff that I explain, it's the domestic suspense, it's the kind of investigator who's really pushing herself to solve a murder, and it's basically, because of that, there's a lot of unreliable narrator because you as the reader, Sadie is a very intense, anxious helicopter mom, and you start to kind of really question this POV that you're following. And she's also giving you conflicting information about Camille and kind of their past with each other. So it gets really, really interesting. And this is where I have to leave you in non-spoilery territory, because I had no problem with the thing that is the deal breaker for many readers. Ultimately, I really enjoyed this book. It is a pretty bonkers suspense book. Okay, we're gonna talk about spoilers. I'm gonna start with a light trigger warning spoiler where I don't actually spoil the ending of the book. That is for people to determine whether or not they want to read the book at all and or get out on the spoilers. So just trigger warning spoiler. You there? Hi? Okay. This is the potential deal breaker for some of you readers. One of the twists of this book, which is a trope, is mental health related. One of the twists is that Sadie definitely has some mental health issues. She is indeed an unreliable narrator for that reason. I'm not going to tell you more so it doesn't ruin the entire book in case you do want to read it before I get to the rest of the spoilers. But there is a conceit, a twist in the book where another character manipulates Sadie knowing that she struggles with mental illness and essentially gaslights her. I know this is a huge deal breaker for a lot of readers. They're just a flat no on that trope. They don't want to see a character who has mental health issues being gaslit and abused in the course of a suspense novel. This trope isn't a deal breaker for me. Thus, it didn't bother me on the same level that I do acknowledge it can bother other people. So that is the end of the kind of general spoilery trigger warning. And now I'm going to do a spoiler section where I go like just spoilers, where I just kind of tell you how I felt about the way that things went. This is probably going to be most useful for people who either are never going to read this and love spoilers, or people who have read it once it comes out and want to see what someone thinks. So I just want to talk about it a little bit. So full on spoilers. So in my summary, I purposely did not mention the third POV in this book because once I got to it, it's when I was really positive I knew exactly what the twist was. It turns out it was only the first twist. So there is a third POV in this book, and it is Mouse. Mouse is a 6-year-old girl with an abusive stepmother. Now, the kind of fake out here is that you do know that Morgan, who died, the neighbor, was a stepmother to a 6-year-old girl. So, of course, what the author's trying to do is make you think that it's the little girl whose stepmother was murdered. But pretty much right away I was like, okay, I think this is Sadie as a child. I think Sadie was abused by her stepmother and it caused dissociative identity disorder. Because pretty quickly, just because of the way Will talked about having cheated on Sadie, I had a weird feeling that Camille and Sadie were the same person. There were just some little hints where I was like, I think Camille is one of Sadie's personalities. And that is indeed what the first major twist of the book is. Indeed, Sadie has dissociative identity disorder, which is a very controversial disorder of whether or not it exists. And it's a disorder, a mental health disorder. And if you have gotten deeper into the spoilers, you might be saying you probably should have put this in the trigger warnings. And the only reason I did it is in case someone wasn't triggered by this particular trope and did choose to read it, because it does kind of ruin the book if you know it going in. But I also know that DID specifically is also something a lot of readers just really, really hate. It's been honestly kind of overdone in fiction, but c'est la vie. And here's the thing. I think the book would just be deeply mediocre if that was the only twist in the book. And as I was reading further and getting ahead of the narrative, I was like, I'm so smart. She has dissociative identity disorder. How basic. And then the book does a thing. And this is where I do think it was brilliantly done by the author, because in hindsight, I think the obviousness of the dissociative identity disorder is a sleight of hand to hide the actual twist, which is Sadie's husband, Will, who I admit I was fooled by. I was fooled, and I'm usually so good at this game, and that game is Spot the Sociopath. Will's a sociopath who has known from the word jump that Sadie has DID and has been using it to his advantage First of all, because he prefers the sexual relationship with Camille, which, gross. You know your wife has a personality disorder because of abuse in her childhood, and you use it to your advantage. Yes, because you're a sick, horrible person. So Will is a crazy sociopath, and he's just been using the fact that his wife has multiple personalities for the entirety of their relationship, especially their marriage. He's not too keen on when she devolves into a scared 6-year-old, but he loves to use Camille to his advantage because Camille is very sexy, straightforward, impulsive, jealous, and so he has used her on more than one occasion in the past to kill people for him. It's pretty dark. I liked that you find out one of the things that Sadie is jealous of. I also didn't put this in the summary because I thought it might make a twist too obvious. Although clearly wasn't obvious to me. You find out that Will's first girlfriend, first fiance, died. She went off the road in snow into a lake and she drowned. Except she didn't. What I actually did start to piece together. I suspect it's Will on some level. I just didn't guess the sociopath twist, which is why I'm so impressed with the book, because it was very well done. The climax is pretty excellent. But he killed his former fiance, and Morgan, the woman who died, was her sister. But basically, Will used Camille, Sadie's alternate personality, to murder Morgan. So Sadie did kill Morgan. She just killed Morgan as Camille and doesn't remember having an argument with her, etc. So people weren't actually lying about seeing her. You also find out that in the past, he used Camille to murder a student of his who was accusing him of sexual harassment. So Sadie/Camille is a multiple murderer. How awkward. But yeah, so it ends up being a really good climax because Will is cuckoo crazy puffs and is basically like, well, damn it. Because Sadie goes to the cops trying to turn herself in. Will's hiding murder weapons to gaslight her. It's a whole thing. So much gaslighting in this book. And he basically poisons her wine and tries to kill her. And it's this amazing big confrontation. I was really impressed with it. And then it does the nice emotional denouement. But the main thing, yeah, I was super impressed with the second twist that Will was a sociopath using Sadie all along for her disorder. But again, with the trigger warning thing, yeah, if people don't like the mentally ill person being abused and gaslit trope, that's literally what this book is. It's the crux of it. It's a sociopath abusing an abuse victim with multiple personality disorder in order to kill people. But yeah, I honestly liked it. I liked it a lot. It really worked for me. Like, I think we're getting like a cheap thriller trope, and then she hits me with one of my favorite thriller tropes. I love a good sociopath reveal, and this one was especially twisted. And spoilers, so I spoiled the heck out of it there and gave a nice conclusion, so I'll give a vaguer conclusion here. This one hit on some tropes I just really, really like, with a vivid setting that I really enjoyed reading. Just descriptions of the weather always do it for me for some reason, as well as some really good writing, which I know is such like a weird thing to point out. Most books I read are just pretty well written, but some books are elevated in some way, and this definitely had some elevated prose that I really, really appreciated. Just some beautiful little moments where I was like, this book's well written, which is always nice. I think this is a good one if you like the frenzied investigator who's trying to solve something so that they're not implicated, small town, some family secrets type domestic suspense. It hits all of those points really, really beautifully. And last but certainly not least, I read another one that I finished it last night at 3 a.m. I stayed up like an extra 3 hours to finish this book. And it's also a little unsettling in a lot of ways. And that book is Perfect Little Children by Sophie Hannah, also out this spring. And the reason this one jumped out to me on NetGalley is I recognize Sophie Hannah's name. She's the new writer for Poirot from Agatha Christie, so she's the new, like, ghostwriter, except she does put her name on them for Poirot. And that was mentioned in the New Yorker article about Dan Mallory, aka AJ Finn. He was her editor. So she was just on my radar, and I'm also like, you're a good enough mystery writer to be chosen to ghostwrite for Agatha Christie. You're probably a good mystery writer. Also, the premise is intriguing. The main character, Beth, used to be friends with Flora. They had an intense friendship theme in books that I like. I love it when it's the intense friendship and you drifted apart and then you come back together. Really good trope for thrillers. So they were really close in college, and then they both got married. Flora to a man named Louis, and Beth to her husband Dom, and they had kids, and they were like young family friends. And then something happened, and you can say drifted apart, but they basically stopped talking to each other. All Beth knows is that Louis got an inheritance from some rich relative and his business took off, and he and Flora became well-to-do rich people, and she hasn't seen them since. But at the beginning of the novel, she's dropping off her son to a football game, a soccer game, in a town that is right by where she knows Flora and Louis moved into a little mega mansion. So she just can't help herself. She does a little drive-by. She drives by the house and just like, I wonder what they look like now. Because it's kind of the thing where she knows that she behaved badly and Flora did something that really hurt her, but she reacted poorly, and she feels guilty for their friendship ending because it was so important to her at one point, and now they're strangers to each other. She drives by and she does see Flora. Flora pulls in her Range Rover, and she gets out of the car and she calls for her children to get out of the car. And then the most bizarre thing happens. The children get out of the car, and they're the exact same age that they were the last time Beth saw them. Thomas and Emily are still 5 and 3, but it's been 12 years. Thomas and Emily should be 15 and 17, but she sees them right in front of her. The little girl Emily is even wearing one of her old shirts, like it's the same girl. They're 5 and they're 3. And Beth becomes obsessed with this because she's like, something's wrong. Something's going on because children age. And it kicks off an obsessive investigation where she is convinced that something is wrong. She tracks down Louis, and he's moved to Florida, and so everyone's like, Beth, you didn't see Flora and her kids because they live in Florida now. What's wrong with you? And there's this whole thing where she goes back and she finds out the Braids don't live next door anymore. The woman who lives next door is named Jeanette, and her husband is Kevin, and they're telling her that she is crazy. So there's all this gaslighting going on. And okay, so there are the expectations I had for this book, and then there is what the book actually is. And I can't talk about what my expectations are and how the book isn't that and didn't meet them without spoilers. So I'm going to talk about that in a separate section. In the vagary, the vague non-spoilery section, the book gets pretty twisted. It's a very good domestic suspense, which is my favorite buzzword, which really just means that it has to do with people who are married, who have relationships, who have interpersonal problems with people, and go on a crazy thread to solve a mystery. In this case, it's Beth being determined to prove that she's not crazy, that she saw what she saw, and that something's very, very wrong with her former friend. What ended up really surprising me about this book, so usually with these, especially when it's someone who is in a sense unreliable, because you as the reader know it's not logical for her to see what she's seen, so what could the logical explanation be? So you as the reader are second guessing the character too, and normally it's that character against the world, and they go on this crusade and they're by themselves, and part of the conflict is that no one believes them. And what I found really interesting about this one is that 2 people do believe Beth, and she tells them. She really reveals the hand early. And that is what surprised me pleasantly, honestly. So she tells her husband Dom right away, and she tells her teenage daughter Xana, short for Susanna. And so her husband and her teenage daughter end up being her sidekicks in this investigation. I was just pleasantly surprised because normally you would have that character keeping it a secret from everyone that she loves, but instead she actually gets a lot of love and support from those characters. So she's being gaslit by external forces, but the kind of internal forces, the people who she loves and trusts, do trust her. Though there does become a thread of tension with her husband, because her husband is far more willing after they've gotten some answers to believe what they've been fed, and Beth, on the other hand, is not satisfied and keeps pushing. But her daughter, her teenage daughter, who is pretty resourceful herself, sticks by her side. So it almost becomes like a family thing, which I was genuinely surprised by. Otherwise, overall, there were some bits that were almost too easy. There were definitely cases where she runs into someone or talks to someone who provides very good information, and it was almost too convenient, but not enough that it really bothered me. I mean, we need the investigation to move forward. And I found the ending really nicely paced. It was like twist with a reversal and then another twist with a micro reversal and then like the big confrontation scene with a nice resolution afterwards. There was just one thing that isn't spoilery that I didn't really like. It didn't impact my rating. It's just kind of worth pointing out. It was this one little detour in the third act that I just found really, really odd. So I mentioned that, the family are involved, and there was this just very strange detour. I'm just mostly saying this because it was weird to me, and if you read it, you might think it's weird too. Where the daughter calls her in a panic, is like, you have to come to school right now. And you think that there's been some piece with the actual investigation into Flora and everything, because the daughter's been actively participating, that like, this is gonna move that plot forward. And Beth gets to school, and it's this weird side plot. It's just a chapter, but it's this weird almost C or D plot where Xana's history teacher, made a racist assumption about her boyfriend, and she got it on her phone. And the teacher took her phone and deleted the file, but Xana had emailed it to Beth, so Beth had the evidence, and she like goes in front of the principal and like stands up for her daughter. And that's the thing. I'm describing this thing that happens that doesn't contribute to the main mystery plot at all. And as I was reading it, I was almost impatient. I was like, okay, what's the point? Why are we on this subplot of Xana's teacher being low-key racist and accusing her of lying about it? It was just weird. It was almost like a non sequitur. I just thought it was weird. But other than that, it was pretty tightly plotted, and that's why it seems so out of place. It's a whole chapter that I didn't get it. I didn't need more relationship building between Beth and Xana. They were already really well established as a good mother-daughter team, and so I just really didn't get that chapter. Ultimately, I give this book 4 stars because it was a good, compelling read, but it didn't like blow my mind, but it was still really, really good. Definitely good enough. I feel safe in Sophie Hannah's hands that I'm interested in checking out her other books. It was very well constructed. It had some good tension. The characters were really interesting. Pretty good reveal. But briefly, I do want to talk about spoilers, and this is mostly just a disclaimer almost. So I said that the book didn't meet my expectations. And I just want to let you know what those were, because if those are also your expectations, you might not like the book. As it happens, I enjoyed what the book was, but if you expect the book to be something else, you probably won't enjoy it as much, if that makes sense. So this isn't going to blow the whole plot for you. It's just going to tell you what the book isn't. But just to be safe, we're going to put up spoilers. So, based on the description, there are 2 explanations, which is there's something logical and based in reality, and the author's going to have to do some backflips to make it work, which is what the book is. It's a reality-based book. Or the other is, it's speculative. So when I read the description, I was like, I wonder if this is a speculative novel. I wonder if it's a sci-fi thriller. I was curious, especially because I read one recently, Mother Knows Best, which was like a near-future sci-fi suspense novel. And I do like that combination when the sci-fi is really grounded in the suspense. So a part of my brain was thinking like clones or something. Or even that, the main character might have mental health issues. She didn't. But a part of me was thinking, could there be a sci-fi twist to the book? And there is absolutely no sci-fi twist to the book. So I just wanted to say that in case you were there as a reader also wondering if this is speculative fiction. It's not. It's a very bog standard adult suspense novel where all of the answers and solutions are based in reality with some real need for suspension of disbelief. So, yeah. So that was my reading month. I had hoped this would be shorter than normal. It's probably still gonna clock in at 40 minutes, and I read half as many books this month as I have in other months, but these books were all really interesting reads. I enjoyed every single one of them, so I recommend each of them depending on your reading preferences. If any of these books and tropes sounded interesting to you, I do recommend that you pick them up. Give this video a thumbs up if you like it, and I will continue to read books and do reading wrap-ups. And if you're not already subscribed to the channel, go ahead and do that. I post new videos 2 to 3 times a week. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, guys, happy reading.